Hi, this is Roy of Roy's Book Reviews. This is my very first installment, my new venture into booktubing. I'm going to give it my best shot. It's going to be no bells, no whistles, just me talking about books that I've read recently, not so recently. I'm going to be borrowing from my own words that I wrote in reviews for these books on Goodreads. And I'm going to start with one I read not so long ago, earlier this year, The Plot Against America by Philip Roth. Many of the books that I read these days are either taken out from the library or there is a library in my train station that I take once a week, and there's just like a shelf that has some books people leave, and it seems to be constantly changing. So I check them out, and if something grabs my attention, I will borrow it, read it, return it, take it on a new one. A Plot Against America is one that I went and got at the library, not at the train station, because I'd heard or read online that they are making a movie, an HBO movie. It's either a movie or a miniseries. I think it's a movie from this book. And the reason why they chose to make this movie now will become apparent to you as it became apparent to me as I read the book. So anyway, here's my review. This was a very interesting piece of alternate historical fiction. Philip Roth asked the question, what if FDR had been defeated in his presidential run for a third term by the charismatic, anti-Semitic Charles Lindbergh, whose main campaign promise was to keep the U.S. out of World War II while having a darker motive for acquiring great power? Roth tells his story in a macro way as well as going micro and showing the impact of Lindbergh's presidency through the eyes of a boy in a Jewish family living in Newark, New Jersey. I decided to read this book upon learning that HBO is doing a movie adaptation of it, as I just mentioned. Portions of it are being filmed in my neighborhood. So I took the opportunity to visit the site of filming when it was taking place a few blocks from my house. It was a very cool experience, made cooler by getting to hang out with a few of the extras. There's a whole side story about that, which maybe I'll get into at the end of this review, but for now I'll stick with the book. I've long been a Philip Roth fan, and while this novel didn't impress me quite as much as the masterful American Pastoral, or crack me up like the hilarious Portnoy's Complaint, it was still a great read. Parallels between the 1940s of Roth's imagination and our current political climate are striking. Simply switch the idea of a man who ascends to the presidency aided by a foreign government, Germany, in the book, with the idea of a man ascending to the presidency aided by a foreign government, Russia in the case of you-know-who. Switch a celebrity with no previous political experience having an improbable meteoric rise to the White House, with a celebrity with no previous political experience having an improbable meteoric rise to the White House. Switch people being thrown into hellish concentration camps because they're Jewish, with people being thrown into hellish detention centers because they crossed the border in hope for a better way of life. One is hypothetical fiction. The other is the life we're currently living. The deeper into this book you get, the more you marvel at how Roth seemed to be stealing from a reality that had not happened yet by creating one that never happened. As a wise man once said, truth is stranger than fiction. So that's basically my review of the book. Those are the words mostly as I wrote them on Goodreads. And as I said, the most striking thing about this book to me was just how much it reminded me of what's going on right now, even though it takes place in the 1940s and it's about a hypothetical situation. Back to the filming. I walked a few blocks over where I knew HBO was filming some scenes or that take place in Union, New Jersey. And I was just kind of standing around, and it was with my wife and my dog in tow. And there were, various cars from the 1940s parked in the street. So that's mostly what was kind of cool going on. And I was taking pictures, and there were extras walking around dressed as people dressed back in the 1940s. And there was a group of three African American actors, extras, who were just kind of hanging around and not being filmed for a scene. So I ended up meeting them and talking to them, and it turns out that the reason why they were not being filmed is because they were called into work that day, only to find out that the neighborhood and the scenes that they were filming was an exclusively white neighborhood in the 1940s. So therefore, it would have been unrealistic to have black people wandering around filming the scenes that took place there. So they were still getting paid, but they had nothing to do. One of the extras brought his dog, who's also an extra, and the dog was being used, but the guy was not. So I talked to the three of them. It was two men, one woman. It was very interesting. And so was Philip Roth's fantastic novel. And I recommend it to anyone, particularly those of you who are interested in politics. And if you're a big Trump fan, then you might not want to read this book, even though the book is nothing about him. And yet it seems to be about him. But really not so much about him and Trump mania, but just about the phenomenon of personality and celebrity overcoming our common sense, and next thing you know, people are signing up for things that you'd never think they would sign up for because of the hatred of the few somehow overwhelming the common sense of the many. So this is my first installment of Roy's books, or whatever this thing is called. I'll come up with a name for it, and I hope you enjoyed it.